Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year! I've recently returned from a long trip to India, Malaysia, and the UAE, Dubai and Abu Dhabi specifically. It's been quite an interesting few weeks. For now, I'm just glad to be back in Barcelona and back to some sort of productive routine again. I'll have articles and podcast episodes about all those places at some point, as well as a continuation of my series of videos about the bike tour in Extremadura that I did last November. Also, plenty of new episodes of the podcast. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. Shout out today to Jack, who is an avid listener, a fan of Spain, and who donated some money a few weeks ago. Jack says, "The podcast is fantastic. Love the literary references, your views on society, etc., etc. Pretty similar to mine. Cool that you do BJJ as well. Keep up the good work." BJJ is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I just came back from the gym from doing that. I've got scrapes on my face from other dudes' butts, from them sitting on me and generally putting me into difficult positions. So, thank you, Jack. Today, I just wanted to say that I'm back in Spain and I wanted to give a little bit of an idea of what's going on this year. So, without further ado, let's talk about Spain's 50 years without Franco. I didn't really have this on my radar, but 2025 is the 50th anniversary of the death of Francisco Franco, Europe's longest-lasting fascist dictator. Needless to say, this topic is very controversial. We're only 8 days into the year, in fact, and I've already read 2 articles in La Vanguardia and one in El País about the government's plans to commemorate Franco's death this year. Not everybody is on board with the plan. Should we really be celebrating Franco at all? For years, November 20th, the anniversary of Franco's death, was a day in which nostalgic old fascists would get together in Plaza de Oriente in Madrid, the place where Franco used to give his public speeches, and probably elsewhere in Spain. They would have a sort of fascist protest and celebrate the legacy of El Caudillo. But fascism isn't what it used to be, and as Giles Tremblett points out in the classic book Ghosts of Spain, we've spent a good part of the last 50 years trying to erase Franco from the collective memory. At the same time, there's been a big effort to recover the memory of the victims of the dictatorship. It's a very complicated situation, and there are people on both sides. The book Ghosts of Spain goes into it in a lot of depth, and it's a highly recommended read. As of now, apparently every single statue of El Caudillo has now been removed from Spanish soil, and most of the places named after him have had their names changed. A lot of places named after his associates, I guess, have also had their names changed. Back in Madrid, I lived in a neighborhood where several of the streets were named after captains and generals in Franco's army, and while I lived there, some of these names were changed to be something completely different. Calle Capitan Aya became Calle del Poeta Joan Maragall, I believe, who I'm assuming is a Catalan poet, etc. It's a long story. I've talked about it very briefly in other articles. Anyway, that's happening this year. Back in 2019, you may recall, if you were following the news, that they even moved Franco's body to a less impressive tomb. He's no longer up in Valle de los Caídos. Instead, he's now buried in the cemetery at Mingo Rubio. That's near El Pardo, just outside Madrid. That's a situation I talked about in the article How to Dig Up a Fascist. That's also before I had a podcast, so that is on the blog, not on the podcast. The big question on everybody's mind then is how can we commemorate the death of Franco without offending some large group of people? And the answer is we probably can't. How do you celebrate the end of a dictatorship? The debate in La Vanguardia so far is about whether we should be celebrating Franco's death or some other event that took place in those years. Franco's death was the start of the transition to democracy, but we've also got a constitution we could celebrate, for example. That was signed in 1978, and we celebrate Dia de la Constitución every December. However, some Catalan groups, and possibly other people from other regions in Spain, have a sort of problem with the Constitution because it doesn't let them declare independence. So celebrating the Constitution is not a solution that everybody is happy with. Anyway, we'll see how this goes. For further information, I've got articles and podcast episodes about the Civil War. There's George Orwell and Homage to Catalonia. That's his famous book about the Spanish Civil War, and I covered it in episode 37. Also, Peter Kemp, who's sort of the opposite of George Orwell, is episode 38. I recommend listening to both of those because they give some valuable context. I've also got another article in my drafts about the Spanish Civil War, some more history of the Spanish Civil War. I'll publish that one of these days. And I've been wondering for some time if I should just get a copy of Paul Preston's biography of Franco and write about that. It's a very big book. It's not the kind of thing I'm, willing to read in the park or on the metro because obviously a biography of Franco. Who knows what sort of reactions that would get, especially up here in Barcelona. But maybe 2025 is the year to learn about Franco. Meanwhile, 50 years is a long time, and I would imagine that a lot of the younger generation has no idea about the Second Republic, the Civil War, or the decades of dictatorship. I have some Spanish friends who are about 60, and they were children for the final year of the dictatorship, so there are people still around who remember the dictatorship. The Civil War generation is not really around anymore. Lots of people have parents who experienced this in a more profound way. Anyway, the socialist government is calling this whole thing a celebration of freedom. There are other segments of society who would rather forget the whole thing or who would rather tell one side or another. It's, as I said, very controversial. Moving on. The next thing is a final update on the Golden Visa scheme. I have talked about this before. Last year, the government said they were going to get rid of the Golden Visa, in which you can get a residence permit by buying a house for €500,000 or investing $1 million or $2 million in the Spanish economy. It took a bit longer than expected for the final version of the law to get through the Senate, but it looks like the last day to have your application in for the Golden Visa is April 2nd, 2025, just under 3 months from now. So the Golden Visa is almost over. As usual, my recommendation is to get a good lawyer and pay him or her a few bucks to explain things to you. There are still various types of work and residence visas you can apply for. You may have a relative from Spain and you could get Spanish residency that way, etc. There's also a digital nomad visa and a non-lucrative visa if you have some money in the bank. So there are plenty of options. Talk to a lawyer. You could look up Melcart Abogados in Madrid if you want more about that. That's who I'm working with on my Spanish nationality. Tell Roberto you heard about him from me, and I'm sure he'll be happy to hear it. For more on the topic of work permits in Spain, check out episode 31 of the podcast, and episode 33 talks about the digital nomad visa. Final plans for 2025, well, not final, preliminary plans for 2025 for the Chorizo Chronicles and the Spain to Go podcast. Well, I do a lot of things around here, and I'm generally a somewhat busy guy. I guess at some point I'll continue making Spanish videos over on Learn Spanish with Daniel. I'll definitely have some more episodes of the podcast coming soon too. For now, I've got the 90 plus episodes up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and elsewhere. If you're listening on Deezer or something, Amazon, I think you can listen to it on Audible. There are dozens of podcast apps you could be using. Whatever you're using is fine. Please give me a like, maybe leave a rating, etc. Whatever your podcast app lets you do. Shout out again to Jack. Thank you very much, Jack, for donating. If you would like to make a donation, please go to expatmadrid.com/donate. You can donate anywhere from €3 to 3 million euros. I would be a little bit embarrassed if you donated 3 million euros, but do what you can within the limits of your financial situation. 2 million would be just fine. The blog and the podcast are both reader and listener supported at this point. I don't have any sponsors and I make a living elsewhere online. So that's the situation. Head over to expatmadrid.com/donate and make your donation. Thank you very much. That's about all I've got for today. I hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world. Check out the blog for much more. Go over to YouTube, Learn Spanish with Daniel. This podcast is also up on the Learn Spanish with Daniel channel, even though it has very little to do with learning Spanish. You can follow me on Instagram if you want. Look for my name, Daniel Welsh, WELSCH. I am there on Instagram. Send me a message through Instagram or through the blog, whatever works for you. That's it for today. Happy New Year once again, and hasta la próxima. Bye.